What's worse than having champagne thrown in your face in front of 300 people, discovering that the woman who did it would come back from the dead to destroy everything you built? Jane Harper thought that night at the Plaza Hotel was the worst moment of her life. Standing in her nanny uniform, drenched in Dom Perignon while Manhattan's elite laughed and filmed, she wanted to disappear, to become invisible, to never exist in their world again. She was wrong. That was just the beginning. Can a nanny fall in love with her employer? Can the dead come back to reclaim what they lost? And what happens when a woman who has nothing left to lose decides to fight back? This is the story of how a nanny became a CEO, how a forbidden love became a family, how a dead woman returned for revenge, and how one woman fought a war she never saw coming. This is that story. Jane Harper had learned early in life that invisible people survive longer. At 27, she had perfected the art of disappearing. In the sprawling Sinclair penthouse on Fifth Avenue, she moved like a shadow. There when the children needed her, gone when the adults wanted space. She folded herself into corners during dinner parties. She kept her eyes down when Hazel Sinclair swept through marble hallways, trailing Chanel No. 5, and contempt. Being invisible was survival. It was also lonely. Jane had been the Sinclair family's nanny for 3 years. She cared for 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Owen with a devotion their mother had never shown. She was the one who wiped Owen's tears after nightmares about monsters under his bed, the one who helped Emma with fractions while Hazel shopped at Bergdorf's, the one who remembered that Emma loved strawberry pancakes on Sundays and Owen was terrified of thunderstorms. The children loved her back. They called her their secret mom when Hazel wasn't listening. Liam Sinclair, the father, barely seemed to notice Jane existed. Or so she thought. He was a kind man trapped in a loveless marriage, too honorable to divorce, too broken to be happy. Jane had watched him for 3 years, careful never to let her feelings show. She knew her place. Hazel made sure of it. Hazel Sinclair was everything Jane wasn't. Wealthy, educated, beautiful in the cold, sharp way of women who had never heard the word no. She had married Liam for his hedge fund fortune and Upper East Side status, not love. Everyone knew it. Hazel didn't even pretend otherwise. She also didn't hide her contempt for Jane. "Don't forget you're just the help," Hazel would say over morning coffee, her voice as sweet as arsenic. "You're here because I allow it, remember that." Jane always nodded, always agreed, always stayed invisible, until the night of the Plaza Hotel charity gala. The children had begged to attend for weeks. Emma wanted to see the ball gowns that looked like princess dresses. Owen wanted to taste fancy desserts from the dessert tower he'd seen in magazines. Liam, in a rare moment of defiance against his wife, had said yes. Just for an hour, he told Jane gently. They deserved to see something beautiful. Jane should have known better, should have stayed home in her small Brooklyn apartment, should have remained invisible. But she took the children. The Plaza Ballroom was a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars. Marble floors gleamed under the feet of women dripping in diamonds and men in custom tuxedos. A string quartet played Vivaldi near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Jane stood near the entrance in her simple black nanny uniform, holding Owen's hand while Emma pressed against her side, eyes wide with wonder at a world she'd only glimpsed through penthouse windows. For 20 magical minutes, everything was perfect. Then, Hazel saw them. Jane watched her employer's face transform from polite socialite smile to cold fury in 3 seconds. Hazel excused herself from her circle of old money friends and crossed the ballroom floor with the focused intensity of a missile locked on target. "What?" Hazel hissed when she reached them, her voice low and venomous. "Do you think you're doing here?" "Mrs. Sinclair," Mr. Liam said the children could... "I don't care what my husband said." Hazel's voice rose. Conversations around them died like candles snuffed out. Heads turned, cell phones lifted. Jane felt 300 pairs of eyes slide toward her like spotlights finding their target. "You," Hazel said, loud enough now for the entire ballroom to hear, "are just the nanny. You don't belong here. You don't belong near these people. You don't belong in my world." Jane's face burned. Emma had started to cry. Owen buried his face in Jane's dress. Hazel reached for a champagne flute from a passing waiter's tray. The golden liquid caught the light from the chandelier above, and then Hazel threw it. The champagne hit Jane's face in a cold, humiliating splash. It soaked her hair, her uniform, dripped down her neck. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Someone laughed. Jane stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything but feel the weight of 300 stares and the sting of public shame. "Get out of my sight," Hazel said coldly. Jane grabbed the children's hands and ran. She ran through the ballroom, past the shocked faces and raised phones, past the doorman who looked away as she stumbled through the plaza's revolving door into the cold November night. She didn't stop running until she reached the subway station 3 blocks away. That night, Jane cried herself to sleep in her tiny Brooklyn studio apartment. She thought about quitting, about leaving New York, about disappearing for real this time. But when morning came, Emma called her cell phone. "Please don't leave us," Emma whispered through tears. "We need you. We love you." Jane closed her eyes. She thought about the champagne, the laughter, the humiliation. Then she thought about 2 children who needed her. "I'm not going anywhere," Jane said quietly. She had no idea how much that promise would cost her, or how much it would give her in return. The weeks following the gala were the longest of Jane's life. Hazel's cruelty, which had always simmered beneath a veneer of cold politeness, now boiled over with relentless intensity. Every morning brought new reminders that Jane was nothing. Every interaction became an opportunity for Hazel to establish dominance. "You're still here," Hazel would say, looking up from her Eggs Benedict with mock surprise. "I thought you'd have packed your bags by now." Jane learned to swallow the insults, to nod and smile and retreat to the children's rooms where she was wanted, where she mattered. But Hazel's mother made everything worse. Mildred Blackwood visited the penthouse at least twice a week, always announced by the sharp click of Louboutin heels on marble floors. She was a woman who had built her identity on old money and older prejudices, and she'd made it her personal mission to remind Jane of the insurmountable distance between their worlds. One afternoon, Mildred found Jane reading to Owen in the library. "How quaint," Mildred said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The help-playing teacher. Tell me, dear, did you even finish high school?" Jane's hands tightened on the book. "I have a degree in early childhood education from QNE, Mrs. Blackwood." "How nice. A state school." Mildred's smile was razor thin. "My granddaughter attends Chapin. Perhaps you've heard of it?" The message was clear. You don't belong. You never will. But the worst part wasn't Hazel's cruelty or Mildred's condescension. The worst part was that Liam said nothing. He'd been in the ballroom that night. Jane had seen him across the crowd, frozen, watching his wife humiliate her in front of Manhattan's elite. And he'd done nothing, said nothing. He'd stood there like a statue while Jane ran from the plaza with champagne dripping from her hair. 2 days after the gala, he'd found Jane in the kitchen preparing the children's lunch. "Jane, I need to apologize," he'd started, his voice quiet. "What Hazel did was unacceptable. You didn't deserve that." "No," Jane had said simply. "I didn't." There was a long silence. Liam looked like he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he just nodded and left. That was it, the extent of his courage. Jane understood then that Liam Sinclair was a good man, but he was also a weak one. Whatever demons kept him chained to Hazel were stronger than his sense of justice, stronger than his kindness, stronger than anything he might feel for the nanny he barely looked at. On her days off, Jane escaped to her real home, a fourth-floor walk-up in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where her mother still lived in the same rent-controlled apartment Jane had grown up in. It was small, the heating was unreliable, and the neighbors were loud, but it was real. It was hers. Her mother, Carmen Harper, was a seamstress who'd worked her fingers raw for 40 years to keep a roof over their heads after Jane's father died in prison. She was small, worn, but unbreakable. "You could quit," her mother said one Sunday afternoon as they shared coffee at the kitchen table. "Find another family, one that treats you with respect." Jane shook her head. "The children need me, Mama. Emma and Owen, they're good kids. They don't deserve to lose another person who actually loves them." Carmen studied her daughter's face. "And what about their father?" Jane looked away. "What about him? You have feelings for him." It wasn't a question. Mothers always knew. "It doesn't matter," Jane said quietly. "I'm the nanny. That's all I'll ever be to him." Carmen reached across the table and took Jane's hand. "You're wrong, Mija. One day you'll see. You're not just anything. You never were." Jane wanted to believe her. But every time she returned to the Fifth Avenue penthouse, every time she saw Hazel's perfect face and designer clothes, and the effortless way she commanded every room, Jane knew the truth. She was the help. She would always be the help. What Jane didn't know was that everything was about to change, because 3,000 miles away, Hazel Sinclair was boarding a private jet with a man who wasn't her husband. A man named Marcos Reyes, who made her laugh in ways Liam never had, who made her feel young and reckless and alive. It was supposed to be a weekend escape to Miami, a brief adventure, but the storm building over the Atlantic had other plans. And when that plane went down, it would set in motion a chain of events that would destroy one life and build another. That would turn a nanny into a wife, a nobody into everything, and a humiliated woman into someone powerful enough to fight back. The champagne-soaked night at the plaza wasn't the beginning of Jane Harper's story. It was just the spark. The real fire was about to start. Hazel Sinclair boarded the Gulfstream G650 at Teterboro Airport on a Friday afternoon in late November, telling Liam she was flying to Miami for a spa weekend with college friends. It was a lie. The only other passenger was Marcos Reyes, a venture capitalist she'd met at a charity auction 6 months earlier. He was everything Liam wasn't: dangerous, attentive, willing to risk everything for a thrill. Their affair had been burning hot for months, conducted in expensive hotel rooms and during business trips Hazel invented out of thin air. But Hazel had no intention of leaving Liam. Divorce meant splitting assets, losing her position in Manhattan's elite circles, becoming just another ex-wife with a settlement. She liked being Mrs. Liam Sinclair. She liked the penthouse, the status, the credit cards with no limits. She just didn't like Liam, so she kept both lives running in parallel: the perfect wife when cameras were watching, the reckless mistress when they weren't. The flight was supposed to take 3 hours. They'd have the weekend in South Beach. Then she'd return to New York on Sunday night with a fake tan and fabricated stories about spa treatments and mimosas by the pool. But 90 minutes into the flight, everything changed. The storm hit without warning. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black with rage. The plane shook violently, champagne glasses shattered against the cabin floor. The pilots' voices crackled over the intercom, tense and clipped, talking about wind shear and emergency protocols. Hazel gripped her seat as the plane dropped, her stomach lurching into her throat. "We're going to be fine," Marcos said, but his face was pale. They weren't fine. The Gulfstream fought the storm for 18 minutes before the engines failed. The plane fell from the sky like a stone, spiraling toward the dark Atlantic waters below. The last thing Hazel remembered was screaming, then impact, then cold, then nothing. Back in New York, Liam received the call at 11 o'clock that night. He was in his study reviewing quarterly reports when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Sinclair?" This is the FAA. I'm calling about your wife, Hazel Sinclair. She was aboard a private aircraft that went down approximately 200 miles off the coast of Florida. We've located wreckage, but no survivors have been found. I'm very sorry. The phone slipped from Liam's hand. Jane heard his cry from the children's hallway. She found him in the study, collapsed in his chair, face in his hands, shoulders shaking. "Mr. Sinclair?" Jane whispered. "What happened?" He looked up at her with devastated eyes. "Hazel, the plane crashed. She's gone." The search lasted 6 weeks. Coast Guard helicopters, naval vessels, civilian volunteers, all scanning thousands of square miles of ocean. They found pieces of the Gulf Stream scattered across the water. They found luggage, seat cushions, fragments of fuselage. They never found bodies. After 45 days, the search was officially suspended. After 6 months, with no remains recovered and no chance of survival, Hazel Sinclair was declared legally dead. The memorial service was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral on a grey January afternoon. Hundreds attended, filling the Gothic cathedral with black designer suits and quiet whispers. Hazel's casket, empty and symbolic, sat at the altar draped in white lilies. Liam sat in the front pew with Emma and Owen, his face a mask of exhausted grief. Not grief for a lost love, but grief for wasted years, for a marriage that had died long before the plane went down, for children who were now motherless. Jane sat in the back, invisible as always in a simple black dress. She watched Emma's small shoulders shake with confused tears, watched Owen lean against his father, not quite understanding why everyone was sad about a mother he barely remembered. And she watched Mildred Blackwood in the third row, draped in black Dior and vintage pearls, weeping into a silk handkerchief. After the service, mourners gathered on the cathedral steps. That's when Mildred saw Jane standing near the edge of the crowd. The older woman's grief transformed into rage in an instant. She crossed the steps with sharp, purposeful strides. "You!" Mildred hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You're happy, aren't you? My daughter is dead and you're probably thrilled. Mrs. Blackwood, I would never—" "Don't lie to me." Mildred's eyes were cold as January rain. "I see the way you look at him, like a vulture circling. Well, let me make something very clear. You are the help. That's all you'll ever be. If you think Hazel's death gives you some kind of opening, you're more deluded than I thought." Jane said nothing. What could she say? Mildred leaned closer. "Stay away from my son-in-law. Stay in your lane, or I will destroy you." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Jane standing alone on the cathedral steps while snow began to fall over Manhattan. Jane should have felt anger, should have felt indignation. Instead, she felt something she hadn't expected: relief. Not because Hazel was dead, but because for the first time in 3 years, she could breathe in the Sinclair penthouse without waiting for the next humiliation, could care for Emma and Owen without Hazel's cruelty poisoning every moment. She felt guilty for the relief, but she felt it anyway. 2 years would pass before everything changed again. 2 years of slowly healing, of the household learning to function without Hazel's toxic presence, of Liam becoming the father he'd always wanted to be. 2 years before Liam Sinclair looked at Jane Harper and saw something other than the nanny. 2 years before invisible became seen. 2 years later, the Sinclair penthouse felt different now, lighter, as if Hazel's absence had lifted a shadow that had hung over the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows for years. Liam had changed too. Without the weight of a failed marriage crushing him, he became the man he'd always been beneath the exhaustion. He laughed more, played with Emma and Owen instead of hiding in his study. He was present in a way he'd never been when Hazel was alive. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to notice Jane. Or rather, he stopped pretending he didn't notice her. The truth was, Liam had been aware of Jane Harper from the moment she'd walked into his home for the nanny interview 5 years ago. He'd noticed the quiet intelligence in her green eyes, The gentle way she'd spoken to Emma and Owen during the trial period, the grace with which she'd navigated Hazel's initial coldness. He'd noticed, and then he'd buried those observations deep, locked them away behind the walls of a man trapped in a loveless marriage who still believed in honor and duty. For years, he'd perfected the art of not seeing her, of treating her as furniture, as part of the household staff, as anything except what she actually was, a kind, beautiful woman who loved his children more than their own mother ever had. He'd been so careful, never let his gaze linger too long when she read bedtime stories to the kids, never stood too close when she handed him his morning coffee, never acknowledged the way his heart lifted slightly when he heard her laugh at something Owen said. He'd been married. Unhappily, miserably married, but married nonetheless. And Liam Sinclair didn't betray his vows, no matter how dead his marriage had become. But Hazel was gone now. The vows were gone. The prison of that marriage had crumbled with a plane crash over the Atlantic, and for the first time in 5 years, Liam allowed himself to truly see Jane Harper. It started small. A thank you that lasted a moment longer than necessary. His hand brushing hers when he passed her a coffee cup in the kitchen, and instead of immediately pulling away, he let the contact linger for half a second, the way his eyes would find her across a room. And now, instead of looking away immediately, he'd hold her gaze for a heartbeat before breaking contact. Jane noticed. How could she not? But she was careful. So careful. She'd been the invisible nanny for 5 years now. She knew the rules, knew her place, knew that women like her didn't end up with men like Liam Sinclair, no matter what foolish hope whispered in her heart late at night. The children, however, had no such reservations. "Papa, you should marry Jane," Emma announced one evening over dinner, her 10-year-old voice matter of fact. "Then she could be our real mom forever." Liam nearly choked on his wine. "Emma, that's not appropriate." "Why not?" Owen chimed in, 7 years old and brutally honest. "You like her. She likes you. Everyone can see it." "That's enough," Liam said, but his ears had turned red. Jane focused intently on her plate, willing herself to disappear into the chair. But the children had planted a seed, and seeds, given time, have a way of growing. 3 months later, on a warm spring evening, Liam found Jane on the penthouse terrace. She was watering the herb garden she'd started, basil and rosemary and thyme growing in terracotta pots against the Manhattan skyline. He'd come looking for her. That was new. For 5 years he'd avoided being alone with her. Now he sought it out. "Jane," he said quietly. She turned, surprised. "Mr. Sinclair, I didn't hear you come out." "Liam." He stepped closer, and this time he didn't stop at a respectful distance. "Please, we've known each other 5 years. Call me Liam." "That wouldn't be appropriate," Jane said automatically, though her voice wavered. "Why not?" "Because I work for you. You're not just an employee." Liam's voice was gentle but firm. "You're family. Emma and Owen love you. I don't know what we would have done without you these past 2 years. You held us together when everything was falling apart." Jane's throat tightened. "I just did my job." "No, you did more than that. Much more." He was close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. "You gave my children a mother when they needed one most. You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost it forever." "Mr. Sinclair." "Liam." The word hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "Liam," Jane whispered, "this isn't a good idea." "Why not?" "Because of who I am, where I come from." The penthouse was silent except for the distant sounds of the city 40 floors below. "I'm the nanny. You're Liam Sinclair. Your mother-in-law already hates me. Society would tear us apart. This would never work. I don't care what society thinks." "You should." Jane's voice cracked. "I've seen what your world does to people who don't belong. I've felt it. The looks, the whispers, the champagne thrown in my face while 300 people laughed. Liam's expression darkened. That should never have happened. I should have stopped her. I should have defended you. That's a regret I'll carry for the rest of my life. It's not your fault. Yes, it is. I was a coward. He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was raw with honesty. I was a coward about everything, Jane. About my marriage. About Hazel's cruelty. About you. About me. Liam met her eyes. I noticed you the day you walked into this house for your interview. I noticed how kind you were to my children, how patient, how you looked at Emma and Owen like they mattered, not like they were inconveniences the way Hazel always did. Jane's breath caught. And I buried it, Liam continued. I had to. I was married. I'd made vows. No matter how dead that marriage was, I wouldn't break them. So I taught myself not to see you. I made you invisible to me because that was the only way I could live in the same house with you and stay honorable. But you did see me, Jane whispered. Sometimes I'd catch you looking. Liam smiled sadly. I wasn't as good at hiding it as I thought. He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. I've wanted to do that for 3 years. Jane's heart hammered against her ribs. But I'm not that man anymore, Liam said quietly. I'm not bound by vows to a woman who never loved me. I'm not hiding behind duty and honor to avoid admitting what I feel. I'm free, Jane, and I don't want to be a coward anymore. He took her hand. His palm was warm against hers. I'm falling in love with you, he said. No, that's not true. I've been in love with you for longer than I want to admit. Maybe years. I just couldn't let myself feel it until now. And I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is impossible, but I need you to know how I feel. I need you to know that this isn't sudden. This isn't me looking for someone to replace Hazel. This is me finally admitting something I've felt since the beginning. Jane's eyes filled with tears. She should pull away, should remind him of all the obstacles between them, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak. Instead, she did something reckless. I love you too, she whispered. I think I've loved you since the first time I saw you smile at Emma when she showed you a drawing she'd made. You looked at her like she'd created a masterpiece, like she was the most important thing in the world. And I thought, that's what a real father looks like. Liam's face transformed. Relief and joy and something deeper flooded his expression. He lifted his hand to her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Can I kiss you? Jane nodded, not trusting her voice. The kiss was soft, gentle, a question and an answer all at once. 5 years of buried feelings, of careful distance, of invisible longing, all distilled into that single moment. When they pulled apart, Jane was trembling. There's something I need to tell you, she said, fear creeping into her voice, about my past, about who I really am. Liam shook his head. Whatever it is, it can wait. Right now, I just want this moment. Just this. He kissed her again, and Jane let herself believe just for a moment that maybe invisible girls could become seen, that maybe fairy tales happened, even to nannies from Brooklyn. She was wrong to wait, wrong to keep her secrets, but she didn't know that yet. For now, on a spring evening with the city glittering below them, Jane Harper was just a woman falling in love with a man who'd been seeing her all along, even when he pretended not to. And that felt like everything. The next 6 months passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing certainty. Late-night conversations after the children were asleep, hands held beneath dinner tables, shared glances across rooms that now carried the weight of acknowledged feelings instead of buried ones. Liam courted her properly, took her to dinner at restaurants where he'd never been with Hazel, walked with her through Central Park on Sunday afternoons, while Emma and Owen ran ahead, giving their father and Jane the privacy to simply be together. He told her about his marriage, about how he'd known within 6 months that Hazel didn't love him, but had stayed anyway because of the children, about the loneliness of sleeping next to someone who felt like a stranger, about the relief mixed with guilt he'd felt when she died. And Jane told him about growing up in Brooklyn with a single mother who worked herself to exhaustion, about her small apartment and state school education, about building Harper's desserts from a dream and $1,000 in savings. But she didn't tell him about her father, didn't tell him about the murder conviction, the prison, the shame that had chased her into changing her name. Not yet. Soon, but not yet. Liam's mother-in-law, Mildred, watched with barely concealed horror but said nothing, calculating her next move. She made her disapproval known in subtle ways, cancelling lunch plans with Liam when she knew Jane would be there, making pointed comments about appropriate matches for widowers of Liam's standing, reminding anyone who'd listen that Jane had been the help. But Liam didn't care. For the first time in his adult life, he was choosing what he wanted instead of what was expected. When Liam proposed in the same terrace garden where they'd first kissed, he did it simply. No grand gesture, no expensive restaurant, just the two of them under the stars with the city spread out below. "I don't have a speech prepared," he said, holding the ring box. "I just know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to make this official. I want you to be my wife, not because the children need a mother, but because I need you. I love you, Jane Harper. Will you marry me?" Jane said yes through happy tears, even as a small voice whispered that she should tell him the truth first, should confess that her real name was Jane Maria Harper, that her father had died in prison after being convicted of manslaughter, that she'd changed her name to escape the shadow of his crime. But Liam looked so happy. Emma and Owen, who'd been hiding behind the terrace door and burst out squealing when they heard yes, were jumping with joy. The ring on her finger caught the city lights and sparkled like a promise. She'd tell him after the wedding, Jane decided, when they were already married, when the truth couldn't destroy what they'd built, when their bond was legal and permanent and unbreakable. It was the biggest mistake of her life, but she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that Liam Sinclair loved her, had loved her for years, even when he'd hidden it behind duty and distance. And that love felt like finally being seen after a lifetime of invisibility. It felt like coming home. The wedding took place on a perfect June afternoon in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, far from the marble coldness of Manhattan's elite venues. Jane had insisted. She wanted something real, something that felt like her, not a performance for people who'd spent years making her feel small. The ceremony was held in the Cherry Esplanade, surrounded by flowering trees and lush greenery. It was intimate, only 50 guests, a stark contrast to the society spectacles Liam had attended for years at the Plaza and the Metropolitan Club. Emma and Owen served as maid of honor and best man, beaming in their formal attire. Emma wore a pale pink dress she'd helped Jane pick out, and Owen stood beside his father in a miniature tuxedo, looking so much like Liam that several guests commented on it. Jane's mother, Carmen, wept happy tears in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief Jane had embroidered for her. Beside Carmen sat two of Jane's oldest friends from Brooklyn, women who'd known her since childhood, who'd never made her feel less than because of where she came from. Liam's business partners attended, polite but clearly uncomfortable with their colleague marrying the help. They sat stiffly in their seats, exchanging glances that said everything about what they thought of this match. A hedge fund manager marrying his children's former nanny. How inappropriate. How beneath him. Jane saw their judgment and didn't care. This wedding wasn't for them. Mildred Blackwood sat in the very back row, her face a mask of cold fury, dressed in black as if attending a funeral rather than a wedding. But she came. Appearances mattered more than her disgust. Better to be present and disapproving than absent, and the subject of gossip. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. The officiant spoke about second chances and found families, about love that grows slowly and roots that run deep. Jane barely heard the words. She was too focused on Liam's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. When Liam slipped the ring on Jane's finger and said, "I do," his voice steady and sure, she almost told him everything right there. Almost stopped the ceremony to confess her real name, her father's crime, the shame she'd been running from since she was 15. The words were on the tip of her tongue. "Liam, before we finish this, there's something you need to know. My father was convicted of manslaughter. He died in prison. I changed my name to escape who I was. But then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Emma and Owen cheered and Carmen sobbed louder, and the moment passed like water through her fingers. She'd tell him tomorrow," Jane promised herself as they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, or next week, or next month. The truth could wait a little longer. The reception was held in a restored brownstone in Park Slope, walking distance from where Jane had grown up. They danced to jazz music. They ate food from Jane's favorite local restaurants. They cut a cake Jane had made herself, 3 tiers of champagne cake with raspberry filling. It was perfect. It was real. It was theirs. For 18 months, Jane lived in a happiness she'd never imagined possible. She wasn't the nanny anymore. She was Mrs. Liam Sinclair. She was Emma and Owen's mother in every way that mattered, attending parent-teacher conferences and school plays, helping with homework and hosting sleepovers. And her small Brooklyn bakery, Harper's Desserts, had grown into 3 locations across the city. The original Park Slope shop, a second location in the West Village, and a flagship store in Tribeca that catered to corporate events and celebrity weddings. She'd been featured in Food and Wine magazine. The New York Times had called her salted caramel macarons transcendent. Jane had everything she'd ever dreamed of. A family, a business, a life that felt real and earned and hers. She should have known it couldn't last. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in November, 18 months after the wedding, the doorbell rang. Jane was in the kitchen making blueberry pancakes, Emma and Owen's favorite. Liam sat at the dining table reviewing emails on his tablet, occasionally glancing up to smile at her. It was their routine, their peaceful, predictable, beautiful routine. "I'll get it," Jane called, wiping flour from her hands with a dish towel. She walked through the penthouse in bare feet, comfortable in her own home in a way she'd never been when she was just the nanny. This was her space now, her family, her life. She opened the door expecting a delivery. Amazon maybe, or flowers from the fundraiser committee Liam supported, or one of the building staff with a package that needed signing for. Instead, she found a ghost. Hazel Sinclair stood in the hallway, older and harder than Jane remembered. Her hair was shorter, streaked with grey she hadn't bothered to cover. Her face was thinner, more angular, with lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. She wore jeans and a leather jacket, not the designer dresses and pearls Jane remembered, but it was unmistakably, impossibly her. "Hello, Jane," Hazel said, her voice cold and sharp as winter glass. Surprised, Jane's vision blurred at the edges. Her knees went weak. She gripped the doorframe to keep from collapsing, her knuckles turning white with the force of her grip. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "You're dead. You're dead. We buried you. We mourned you." Clearly not. Hazel's smile was razor thin. "Here I am, flesh and blood, disappointed." Liam appeared behind Jane, drawn by the sound of her distress. "What is it? What's wrong?" His voice died in his throat when he saw who stood in the hallway. The coffee mug he'd been holding slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. Dark liquid spread across the white stone like blood. "Hazel," he breathed, his face going pale. "How? How is this possible?" Hazel walked past Jane into the penthouse, as if she'd never left, as if the past 2.5 years hadn't happened, as if she owned the space and Jane was still just the hired help who should step aside. Jane felt the power dynamic shift instantly, felt herself shrinking back into invisibility even as she fought against it. "It's a long story," Hazel said, surveying the penthouse with proprietary eyes. She noticed the changes immediately. New furniture, different art on the walls, photos of Jane and Liam's wedding day on the mantel where Hazel's portrait used to hang. "I see you've redecorated. How nice." "Hazel," Liam said again, his voice stronger now. "Tell us what happened." "The plane crashed. They found wreckage. You were declared dead." "The plane did crash," Hazel confirmed, running her hand along the back of the sofa as if testing whether it met her standards. "I survived. Barely. I was thrown from the wreckage when it hit the water. I clung to a seat cushion for 2 days before a fishing boat found me." "My God," Liam breathed. "They took me to a small island off the Bahamas, a village so remote it barely had electricity." Hazel's voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. "I had severe head trauma, amnesia. I didn't know my name, where I was from, anything about my life before. I spent nearly 2 years in that village, working in a restaurant, living in a room above a grocery store with no idea who I really was." Jane's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't possible. People didn't just come back from the dead. "And when you remembered?" Liam asked, his voice hollow. Hazel turned to face them fully. "A tourist came through the village about 4 months ago. American. She was reading a newspaper, the international edition of the Times. There was an article about New York society, some charity gala. And there was a photo. A photo of you, Liam, with her." She pointed at Jane with unconcealed venom. "The moment I saw that photo, everything came flooding back. Who I was, what had happened. I tried to come home immediately, but imagine my surprise when I discovered I'd been declared legally dead. That my husband had remarried, that the nanny was living my life, sleeping in my bed, raising my children." She turned to Jane, her smile razor-sharp and full of malice. "You work fast, don't you? Waited until my body was cold before you made your move. Oh wait, there was no body. How convenient for you." "That's not fair," Jane said, finding her voice. "I thought you were dead. We all did." "Fair?" Hazel laughed, sharp and bitter. "You want to talk about fair? I survived a plane crash, lost 2 years of my life to amnesia, and came home to find my entire existence erased. My marriage dissolved, my children calling another woman mother, my husband wearing a wedding ring that isn't from me." Jane felt the accusation like a physical blow. Within hours, the penthouse became chaos. Police arrived to verify Hazel's identity through fingerprints and dental records. They took samples, made calls, cross-referenced databases. It took 4 tense hours, but finally they confirmed it. It was really her, alive, real, not a hallucination or a ghost or a nightmare Jane could wake up from. Liam's lawyer arrived next, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in complex family law. She'd handled Liam's estate matters when Hazel was declared dead, and now she was back to untangle this impossible situation. Rebecca set up in Liam's study, spreading documents across his desk, while Jane sat frozen on the leather couch and Liam paced near the windows. "This is unprecedented," Rebecca said, reviewing documents and making notes on her legal pad. "I've never handled a case quite like this, but legally, Mr. Sinclair, your marriage to Jane is valid. When you married her, Hazel was legally deceased. The state had declared her dead through proper channels after the required waiting period. That doesn't change just because she's reappeared. So I'm still married to Jane?" Liam asked, needing to hear it confirmed. "Yes. Your first marriage to Hazel was dissolved by the declaration of death. The death certificate is a legal document that ended your marital contract. Hazel is legally alive again now, but that doesn't automatically invalidate your current marriage to Jane." Jane felt like she was drowning. "So what happens now?" "Now," Rebecca said carefully, choosing her words with precision, Hazel cannot simply reclaim her position as your wife, Mr. Sinclair. Legally, you are married to Jane. That's not in dispute. However, Hazel can make things very, very complicated if she wants to. How? Liam demanded. Custody issues for one. Emma and Owen are biologically her children. She can file for custody or visitation rights. Rebecca flipped through her notes. There are also potential financial claims. When Hazel was declared dead, her assets were distributed according to her will and state law. Now that she's alive, she may have grounds to reclaim some of those assets, particularly anything that was in her name or part of marital property. This is insane, Liam said. It's complicated, Rebecca agreed. We'll fight any claim she makes. But you need to be prepared for a long legal battle. Hazel wanted that battle. She checked into the Pierre Hotel that night, booking a suite she could barely afford with what remained of her trust fund. But she made it clear she wasn't going away. She wasn't slinking off to lick her wounds. She was here to fight. She hired lawyers of her own, expensive ones from a white shoe firm that specialized in high-net-worth divorces and custody battles. They couldn't dissolve Liam and Jane's marriage, but they filed motions for custody considerations, for access to Emma and Owen, for financial reviews of marital assets. And Hazel visited. Constantly. She appeared at the penthouse unannounced, testing the boundaries of what she could get away with. She called Liam's office a dozen times a day until his assistant started screening the calls. She positioned herself outside Emma's school at dismissal time, waiting to see the daughter who barely remembered her, until the school security asked her to leave. "I'm not going anywhere," she told Jane during one confrontation in the building lobby, her voice low and dangerous. "This is my life. You stole my husband, my children, my place in this world. You saw an opportunity when I died and you took it. Well, I'm back now, and I'm going to take it all back." Jane stood her ground, even as fear clawed at her throat. "Liam loves me. The children love me. You can't just undo 2 years because you survived a plane crash." Hazel leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper only Jane could hear. "Watch me," she hissed. "You're still just the nanny, Jane. You're playing dress-up in my life. But I'm the real Mrs. Sinclair. I always will be. And before this is over, everyone will remember that." Then she smiled, cold and cruel, turned, and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble lobby floor like a countdown to war. Jane returned to the penthouse on shaking legs and found Liam standing at the windows, staring out at the city lights as darkness fell over Manhattan. "We'll fight this," he said without turning around, his voice hard with determination. "Together. She can't destroy what we built. Our marriage is legal. Our family is real. She can't just take that away." Jane wanted to believe him, wanted to think that love was enough to survive the impossible, that legal documents and wedding vows could stand up against a woman who'd literally returned from the dead. But looking at Liam's tense shoulders, at the way his hands were clenched into fists, at the fear he was trying so hard to hide, Jane felt the first tremors of doubt. Hazel Sinclair had returned from the dead, and she was just getting started. Hazel's first strategy was seduction. She appeared at Liam's office unannounced, wearing the Valentino dress he'd once told her looked beautiful. She sent nostalgic text messages about their early years together, before everything turned cold and bitter. She showed up at his regular coffee shop, at the gym he frequented, at charity events where she knew he'd be. Every encounter was carefully staged to look accidental, intimate, like fate trying to reunite them. Liam remained distant and polite, professional, cold. "I'm married, Hazel, to Jane. That's not changing." Hazel's smile never wavered, but her eyes grew harder with each rejection. When seduction failed, she tried jealousy. She arranged to be photographed with Liam leaving his office building, standing close enough that tabloid cameras could suggest intimacy where none existed. She sent expensive gifts to the penthouse with cards signed love, as always, knowing Jane would see them. She called during family dinners, her voice honey-sweet as she asked to speak with Emma and Owen about their day. Jane watched it all with growing anxiety, but she trusted Liam. He was transparent about every encounter, every message, every attempt Hazel made to wedge herself between them. "She's desperate," Liam told Jane one night as they lay in bed. "She knows she's lost. This is just noise." But the noise was exhausting, corrosive. It crept into their peace like poison. Then Hazel changed tactics. One Saturday afternoon, she invited Emma and Owen to her suite at the Pierre for what she called quality time with their mother. Liam, wanting to be fair to the children, agreed to supervised visits. 2 hours into the visit, Hazel called Liam in a panic. "Owen's running a fever," she said, her voice tight with concern. "It came on suddenly. He's burning up. I think we should take him to a doctor." Liam was there in 15 minutes, his heart racing with parental fear. When he arrived at the suite, Owen was sitting on the couch watching cartoons, looking perfectly healthy. Emma played nearby with her phone. "His fever broke," Hazel said quickly, meeting Liam at the door, "just in the last few minutes. But I'm still worried. Maybe you should check him yourself." Liam knelt beside Owen, feeling his forehead. Cool. Normal. The boy looked confused by all the attention. "I feel fine, Papa," Owen said. Hazel moved to the bar area. "You look stressed, Liam. Let me get you something, just some juice. You've been running around, you should hydrate." She poured from a crystal pitcher, handed him a glass of cranberry juice. Liam drank without thinking. He was too focused on Owen, on making sure his son was truly all right, to notice the slight bitterness beneath the sweet. Within 10 minutes, his head felt heavy. The room started to tilt. "Hazel," he managed, "something's wrong. You just need to lie down," she said smoothly, taking his arm. "Come on. The bedroom's just here." Emma looked up from her phone, frowning. "Papa?" "He's fine, sweetheart," Hazel said, "just tired. Stay here with Owen." Liam's legs weren't working right. Everything felt distant, underwater. He let Hazel guide him to the bedroom because he couldn't quite remember how to resist. She helped him onto the bed. His eyes were already closing. "Just rest," Hazel whispered. Then she arranged the scene, removed his shoes, unbuttoned his collar, mussed her own hair, removed her cardigan so she wore only a silk camisole, lay down beside him on the bed, close enough that a photograph would tell a very specific story. She waited. Back at the penthouse, Jane paced the living room. Liam had said he'd be gone an hour. It had been 3. His phone went to voicemail. Something was wrong. She felt it in her bones. Then her phone rang. Emma. Jane. Emma's voice was small and uncertain. "Papa's at Mommy Hazel's hotel. He's been here a long time. He's sleeping in her bedroom and won't wake up." Jane's blood turned to ice. "What room, sweetheart?" Emma told her. Jane was in a taxi in 5 minutes, her heart hammering. She knew what Hazel was doing, knew it with absolute certainty. This was a trap, a carefully constructed scene designed to destroy everything. The taxi couldn't move fast enough through Manhattan traffic. When Jane reached the pier, she didn't knock. She used the spare key card Liam kept in his wallet for the children's visits, the one he'd shown her that morning without thinking. The suite's living area was empty except for Owen watching television. "Where's your father?" Jane asked, keeping her voice calm. Owen pointed to the closed bedroom door. Jane opened it. Hazel lay on the bed beside Liam, her hair artfully disheveled, her clothing suggesting intimacy. Liam was unconscious, his breathing slow and heavy. Hazel sat up slowly, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. "Oh, Jane, this is awkward." Jane crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Liam's wrist, checking his pulse, strong and steady, but his skin was clammy. "What did you give him?" Jane demanded. "I don't know what you mean," Hazel said innocently. "We were talking, reminiscing, and one thing led to another. You know how it is with former lovers." Jane looked at Liam's face. His pupils were dilated. His breathing pattern was wrong. "You drugged him. That's a serious accusation. Jane leaned close to Liam's face and smelled his breath. Bitter almonds beneath the cranberry. Benzodiazepine, probably. Enough to make him compliant and fuzzy, but not enough to require hospitalization. She'd seen it before years ago when her mother's neighbor had been roofied at a bar in Brooklyn. "You're disgusting," Jane said quietly. "And you're naive." Hazel stood, smoothing her camisole. "Did you really think I'd just let you have my life? That I'd disappear because you put a ring on your finger? This isn't your life anymore." Hazel's smile was cold. "Prove it. Tell him what happened here. See if he believes you. It'll be your word against mine. And who do you think Manhattan society will believe? The widow who miraculously survived? Or the nanny who swooped in the moment I was declared dead?" Jane said nothing. She just gathered Liam's shoes, his jacket, and somehow half-carried, half-guided him out of the bedroom. Emma and Owen watched with wide, frightened eyes. "Get your things," Jane told them gently. "We're going home." In the taxi back to the penthouse, with Liam's head resting against her shoulder and the children quiet in their seats, Jane made a decision. She'd tell Liam everything. The drugging, the setup, all of it. And then she'd tell him the truth she'd been hiding since the day they met. Because if Hazel was willing to go this far, there were no more secrets safe, no more time to wait. The war had begun, and Jane Harper was done being invisible. Liam woke the next morning with a splitting headache and fragmented memories of the previous day. Jane sat beside the bed waiting. She told him everything. The sudden illness that wasn't real, the juice that tasted wrong, Hazel positioning herself in the bed like a lover, the whole calculated scene designed to create doubt. Liam's face went from confusion to fury in seconds. "She drugged me?" Jane nodded. "I could smell it on your breath. Something to make you compliant, confused. She wanted me to walk in and find you together, to make me doubt you, to destroy us from the inside." Liam stood, swaying slightly, still feeling the after effects. "That's assault. That's criminal. It's also nearly impossible to prove," Jane said quietly. "You didn't go to a hospital. There's no toxicology report. It's our word against hers." Liam's hands clenched into fists. "This ends now. Today." He called his lawyer before breakfast. By noon, Rebecca Chen had filed a restraining order prohibiting Hazel from coming within 100 feet of Liam, Jane, or the penthouse. She could see Emma and Owen only during scheduled supervised visits at a neutral location. Hazel received the papers at the Pierre that afternoon, and that's when she stopped playing games and started playing for blood. The first attack came against Harper's Desserts. Jane's bakery had 3 locations now. The original shop in Park Slope, a second in the West Village, and a flagship store in Tribeca that catered to corporate events and high-end weddings. Her salted caramel macarons had been featured in Food and Wine. Her chocolate tortes were legendary. It was the business she'd built from nothing. Her proof that she was more than just the nanny, more than just Liam's wife. Hazel went after it with surgical precision. First came the cancelled orders. 3 major corporate clients pulled their contracts within a week, citing vague concerns about quality and reliability. When Jane called to ask what happened, they were evasive, apologetic, gone. Then came the health inspector, an anonymous complaint about food safety violations. The inspector found nothing wrong, but the visit made the news. Harper's Desserts under investigation for safety concerns. The headline was enough. Then came the reviews. Dozens of 1-star ratings appeared overnight on Yelp and Google. Fake accounts claiming food poisoning, terrible service, rude staff. Jane's team worked frantically to respond, to flag them as fraudulent, but the damage was spreading. Sales dropped 30% in 2 weeks. Jane knew exactly who was behind it, but knowing and proving were different things. She didn't break, didn't hide. She doubled down. She invited food critics back for tastings. She offered free samples at farmers markets. She posted behind-the-scenes videos on social media showing her kitchens, her staff, her commitment to quality. She fought for her business with everything she had. Slowly, painfully, it started to work. Real customers defended her online. Regular clients wrote genuine reviews. The fake ones got flagged and removed. Harper's dessert survived, but Hazel wasn't finished. 1 month after the bakery attacks, Jane discovered she was pregnant. She took the test in the penthouse bathroom on a Wednesday morning, hands shaking as the second line appeared. Positive. 6 weeks along. She'd been so careful with her birth control, but nothing was perfect. And now, in the middle of a war with a woman who wanted to destroy her, Jane was carrying Liam's child. She told him that night. They sat on the terrace where he'd first kissed her, the city glittering 40 floors below. "I'm pregnant," Jane said simply. Liam's face transformed. Joy, pure and uncomplicated, flooded his expression. He pulled her into his arms. "That's wonderful. That's perfect, is it?" Jane's voice cracked. "Hazel's trying to destroy us. She's going to use this against me somehow. Against us. Let her try." Liam held her tighter. "This is our family. Our life. She doesn't get to take that away." Jane wanted to believe him. Wanted to think a baby would be safe from Hazel's rage. She was wrong. The pregnancy was smooth and healthy. Jane's doctor assured her everything was progressing normally. Emma and Owen were thrilled about having a baby sister. Liam was attentive and protective and impossibly happy. And Hazel watched, waited, planned. Jane gave birth on a rainy April morning at Lenox Hill Hospital. A baby girl, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with Liam's dark hair and Jane's green eyes. They named her Alice. Alice Harper Sinclair. A daughter, a sister, a symbol of everything Jane and Liam had built together, despite Hazel's attempts to tear them apart. For 2 weeks, the penthouse was filled with the exhausted joy of new parents, sleepless nights and tiny fingers wrapping around Jane's thumb. Liam pacing the floor at 3 in the morning, singing softly to a crying infant. Emma and Owen taking turns holding their sister with careful, protective hands. It felt like peace, like victory, like maybe they'd finally won. Then, 6 months after Alice was born, everything shattered, because Hazel Sinclair had spent those 6 months planning, watching, learning the family's routines, hiring investigators to track their movements, finding the cracks in their security. And when she found what she was looking for, she made a phone call to a man named Victor Chen, who specialized in solving problems for people with enough money to pay. The kidnapping would happen in 3 days. Jane didn't know that yet. She was too busy being happy, too busy watching Alice smile for the first time, watching Owen make his baby sister laugh, watching Liam fall asleep with Alice on his chest after midnight feedings. She didn't know that Hazel had finally found a weapon Jane couldn't defend against. She didn't know that the worst was yet to come, but she would learn soon enough. Because on a sunny October afternoon, while Jane was at the bakery reviewing new recipes and Liam was at the office, Hazel would make her move, and nothing would ever be the same. The day Alice disappeared started like any other Tuesday. Jane left for the Tribeca bakery at 9 in the morning to meet with a wedding planner about a 5-tier custom cake. Liam was already at his office downtown, preparing for a board meeting. Emma and Owen were at school. Alice, 6 months old and just learning to sit up on her own, stayed at the penthouse with Martha, the housekeeper who'd worked for the Sinclair family for 15 years. Martha had helped raise Emma and Owen. She was family, trustworthy, safe, or so everyone thought. At 10:30, the doorbell rang. Martha, folding laundry in the utility room with the baby monitor beside her, heard it through the speaker system. She checked the security screen and saw a woman in a FedEx uniform holding a large package. "Delivery for Sinclair," the woman said into the camera. Martha buzzed her up. Standard procedure. They received packages constantly. She opened the door with Alice balanced on her hip, the baby gurgling happily, and reaching for Martha's silver necklace. The woman wasn't alone. A man appeared from the stairwell, moving fast. He shoved Martha backward into the penthouse. She stumbled, instinctively tightening her grip on Alice, trying to shield the baby with her body. The woman grabbed Alice from Martha's arms with practiced efficiency. "No!" Martha screamed. "Stop! Please!" The man hit her. One brutal strike to the temple. Martha crumpled to the marble floor, conscious but dazed, blood trickling from a cut above her eye. The woman was already running for the elevator, Alice crying in her arms. The whole thing took 17 seconds. By the time Martha managed to crawl to her phone and call 911, the kidnappers were in a black SUV heading toward the Lincoln Tunnel, and Alice was gone. Jane's phone rang at 10:45. She saw Liam's name and answered with a smile, expecting him to ask about her meeting. Instead, she heard 3 words that stopped her heart. They took Alice. Jane's vision blurred. The phone slipped from her hand. The wedding planner across the table asked if she was all right, but Jane couldn't hear her over the roaring in her ears. She ran from the bakery and into the street, barely aware of the taxi she threw herself into or the address she screamed at the driver. When she reached the penthouse, it was already swarming with police. Martha sat on the couch with a paramedic treating her head wound, crying and apologizing over and over. Liam stood in the center of the living room, his face carved from stone, talking to a detective. Jane ran to him. He caught her, and they held each other while the world spun out of control around them. The detective's name was Sarah Morrison, a specialist in kidnapping cases. She was calm and methodical in a way that should have been reassuring, but only made Jane's terror sharper. "We need to move fast," Detective Morrison said. "The first 24 hours are critical. We're already reviewing building security footage, tracking traffic cameras, putting out alerts." Liam's voice was hollow. "Who would do this? Who would take our daughter?" But Jane already knew. "Hazel," she whispered. Liam looked at her. "You can't know that." "Who else?" Jane's voice rose with hysteria. "Who else hates us enough to steal our child?" Detective Morrison's expression remained neutral. "We'll investigate all possibilities." "Does Ms. Sinclair have access to this kind of operation?" "She has money," Jane said. "And rage, that's all she needs." 4 hours later, Jane's phone rang from an unknown number. She answered with shaking hands. The voice on the other end was electronically distorted, unrecognizable. "If you want to see your daughter again, you'll bring $5 million in cash to a location we'll provide. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. Detective Morrison, listening on the trace equipment the FBI had installed, looked grim. "That's not enough time to track. They know what they're doing." "We'll pay," Liam said immediately. "Whatever they want, I'll have the money ready. Mr. Sinclair, we don't recommend paying ransom. It doesn't guarantee your daughter's safe return, and it funds criminal operations. I don't care." Liam's voice was steel. "They have my daughter. I'll give them whatever they want." But Jane was thinking hard through the panic. Hazel had mentioned something once years ago, during one of her cruel monologues about her superior life. Something about a beach house in the Hamptons that her mother Mildred owned, a place Hazel used to escape to as a child. "The Hamptons," Jane said suddenly. "She's in the Hamptons." Detective Morrison turned. "What makes you think that?" Jane explained about the beach house, about Mildred, about the place Hazel would feel safe and hidden. "It's a long shot," the detective said, "but I'll have teams check property records for Mildred Blackwood in that area." Jane grabbed her arm. "I know I'm right, I feel it. Please, you have to check. Within 2 hours they'd found it. A beachfront property in Southampton, registered under one of Mildred's corporate shells. Remote, private, perfect for hiding." Detective Morrison assembled a tactical team, but Jane had a different idea. "Let me go," she said. "Let me talk to her first. If Hazel sees police, she might panic, might hurt Alice. But if I go alone, if I offer to trade myself for Alice, she might listen. Absolutely not, Liam said. I'm not losing both of you. You won't. Jane's voice was steady now, clearer than it had been in hours. This is what she wants, me. Gone. Out of your life. I'll give her what she wants. But we'll have backup. The FBI can surround the house. I'll just be the bait. Detective Morrison considered it. It's risky. Everything's risky, Jane said. But I know Hazel. She wants to hurt me. She wants me to suffer. She won't be able to resist if I walk in alone. After 30 minutes of planning, they had a strategy. Jane would drive to the Southampton house alone, or appearing to be alone. She'd go inside and negotiate. The tactical team would be positioned around the perimeter, ready to breach the moment they had confirmation Alice was safe. It was dangerous. It could go wrong in 1,000 ways, but it was Alice's best chance. Jane kissed Liam before she left. A long, desperate kiss that tasted like fear and love and goodbye. Bring our daughter home, he whispered against her lips. I will, Jane promised. I swear I will. Then she got into the car and drove toward Southampton, toward Hazel, toward whatever came next. In the back seat, hidden beneath a blanket, was Detective Morrison in plain clothes, armed and ready. Jane wasn't actually alone, but Hazel wouldn't know that until it was too late. The Southampton beach house sat alone on a stretch of private shoreline, grey and weathered by salt air and neglect. Mildred hadn't visited in years. It was the perfect hiding place. Jane parked the rental car in the gravel driveway as the sun began to set over the Atlantic. Detective Morrison stayed hidden in the back seat until Jane gave the all-clear signal. The tactical team was already in position, invisible in the dunes and beach grass surrounding the property. Jane's hands shook as she approached the front door. She could hear the ocean behind the house, waves crashing against sand with relentless rhythm. She knocked. Hazel opened the door holding a glass of wine, as calm as if Jane had arrived for a dinner party. I knew you'd figure it out, Hazel said. You always were smarter than you looked. Where's Alice? Jane's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Safe, for now. Hazel stepped aside. Come in. We should talk. Jane entered the beach house. It smelled of mildew and old wood. The furniture was covered in white sheets like ghosts. Through an open doorway, Jane could see into a bedroom where Alice lay sleeping in a portable crib, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. Relief hit Jane like a physical blow. Alice was alive, unharmed. She looks like him, Hazel said, following Jane's gaze. Your daughter. She has Liam's eyes. Must drive you crazy, seeing him in her face every day. Jane forced herself to look away from Alice to focus on Hazel. What do you want? What do I want? Hazel laughed, sharp and bitter. I want my life back. The life you stole while I was floating in the ocean, clinging to debris, watching my lover drown beside me. I didn't steal anything. You were declared dead. Legally, maybe, but we both know the truth, don't we? Hazel moved closer. You waited like a vulture. The moment I was gone, you swooped in. Poor grieving widower. Poor motherless children. And there you were, already in the house, already playing mother, already in position. I loved them, I love them. That's not a crime. No, but this is. Hazel gestured toward Alice. Kidnapping. Federal offense. I could go to prison for the rest of my life. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take Alice and leave. You're going to get in your car, drive away, and never come back. Jane's heart hammered. What? I don't want the baby. I want you gone. Completely. Forever. You'll disappear. Change your name again like you did before. Start over somewhere far from New York. And if you do that, if you vanish and never contact Liam or Emma or Owen again, I won't hurt Alice. I'll let her go with you right now. And if I refuse, then I make a phone call and the man I hired makes Alice disappear for real. Hazel's voice was ice. You'll never find her. Never know if she's alive or dead. Is that what you want? Jane's mind raced. She had to keep Hazel talking. Had to give the team time to get into position. You really think Liam will want you back after this? Jane asked. After you kidnapped his daughter? He won't know it was me. No proof, no evidence, just an anonymous kidnapping that you miraculously solved by finding her here. And I'll be nowhere near this house when the police arrive. Already covered. You planned this for months. I planned for 2 years. Hazel's smile was cold. Every detail, every contingency. I'm not the same woman who died in that plane crash, Jane. I'm smarter now, harder, and I'm done losing. Outside, Detective Morrison had quietly exited the car and signaled the tactical team. They moved like shadows toward the house, weapons drawn, taking positions at every exit. Jane kept talking. You think this will bring you peace? You think destroying me will make you happy? I don't care about happy anymore. I care about winning. Then you've already lost, Jane said quietly. Because even if I disappear, even if you get everything you want, you'll still be the woman who abandoned her children, who cared more about revenge than being a mother. That doesn't change. Hazel's face twisted with rage. You don't get to judge me. You're nothing. You were always nothing. The front door exploded inward. FBI. Hands where we can see them. Tactical team members flooded the house, weapons raised, voices shouting commands. Hazel spun toward them, shock breaking through her composure for the first time. Jane ran to Alice, scooping the crying baby from the crib and holding her tight against her chest. Safe, alive, whole. Hazel Sinclair, you're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy. Detective Morrison appeared, handcuffs ready. You have the right to remain silent. This is a mistake, Hazel said, but her voice had lost its certainty. I didn't kidnap anyone. I'm the victim here. This woman stole my life. Save it for your lawyer. Detective Morrison secured the handcuffs around Hazel's wrists. We have you on recording. Everything you said, every threat you made. We heard all of it. Hazel's eyes found Jane across the room. You recorded me. Jane said nothing, just held Alice tighter as the baby's cries faded to whimpers. Officers led Hazel toward the door. As she passed Jane, she stopped. This isn't over, Hazel whispered. Yes, Jane said quietly. It is. Hazel was taken away. Jane heard car doors slam, engines start, the sound of vehicles leaving toward the distant city. Detective Morrison approached gently. You did well, Mrs. Sinclair. Your daughter's safe. We'll need your statement, but take a minute first. Jane nodded, unable to speak past the tears flooding her eyes. An hour later, back in Manhattan, Jane walked into the penthouse carrying Alice. Liam was there, and Emma and Owen, and they collapsed together in a tangle of relief and tears, and whispered thank yous to whatever forces had brought Alice home. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Hazel was charged with kidnapping, extortion, assault, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording of her confession, Martha's testimony about the attack, security footage of the kidnappers, financial records linking Hazel to Victor Chen, the man she'd hired. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. 2 months into her sentence, Hazel received a visitor request. Jane Harper Sinclair wanted to see her. Hazel almost refused, but curiosity won. They sat across from each other in the prison visiting room, separated by plexiglass and phones. Why are you here? Hazel asked. To tell you something, Jane said. I forgive you. Hazel laughed bitterly. I don't want your forgiveness. I know. But I'm giving it anyway. Because holding on to hate would make me like you, and I refuse to let you turn me into something cruel. Hazel's smile was razor sharp. You think you've won, don't you? You think you get the fairy tale ending. I think I get to go home to my family, and you get to stay here. That's not winning, that's just justice. Jane stood to leave. Wait, Hazel said. Did you ever really love him? Or was it always about what he could give you? Jane looked at her one last time. I loved him when I was invisible, when I had nothing, when loving him only brought me pain. That's how I know it's real." She hung up the phone and walked away. 2 weeks later, Hazel was involved in an altercation with another inmate over something trivial, a dispute about a television channel. It escalated. Hazel, who'd never learned to back down, pushed too hard. The other woman pushed back harder. By the time guards arrived, Hazel Sinclair was on the floor, her skull fractured against the concrete, bleeding out faster than the prison medical team could stop. She died before the ambulance arrived. Liam received the call from the warden that evening. He told Jane while they sat in the nursery watching Alice sleep. "She's gone," he said quietly. "Hazel. She died in prison." Jane felt a strange emptiness, not grief exactly, but not satisfaction either. Just a hollow sense that something violent and painful had finally ended. "I'm sorry," Jane said, because she didn't know what else to say. Liam took her hand. "Are you?" Jane thought about it. About champagne thrown in her face, about stolen babies and threats, and 2 years of psychological warfare. About a woman so consumed by rage that she'd destroyed herself. "No," Jane admitted. "I'm not sorry she's gone, but I'm sorry she wasted her whole life being cruel." "That's sad." Liam kissed her forehead. "You're a better person than I am." "No," Jane said. "Just tired of carrying hate. It's too heavy." Mildred Blackwood suffered a stroke 3 days after her daughter's death. The shock and grief were too much for her 80-year-old heart. Jane visited her in the hospital at Mildred's request. The old woman lay small and frail in the white bed, half her face paralyzed, her words slurred but understandable. "I was wrong," Mildred whispered. "About you, about everything. You were the mother my grandchildren needed. I was too blind to see it." Jane sat beside the bed. "I forgive you, Mrs. Blackwood." Mildred's working eye filled with tears. "Will you tell them, Emma and Owen, that I'm sorry?" "I will." Mildred died that night, peacefully, with the burden of her cruelty finally lifted. The funerals were small. Jane didn't attend. Neither did the children. Liam went alone, more out of obligation than grief, and said his goodbyes to the 2 women who'd made his first marriage a prison. When he returned to the penthouse, Jane was waiting. "It's over," he said. "Yes," Jane agreed. "It's finally over." And for the first time in 3 years, she believed it. 5 years later, the Harper's Desserts flagship store in Tribeca was packed for the grand opening celebration of the company's international headquarters. Jane stood at the center of the gleaming space, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, watching her dream expand beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Harper's Desserts had grown into an empire. 15 locations across New York, London, and Paris. A line of premium baking products in Williams-Sonoma, a best-selling cookbook, features in Bon Appetit and the New York Times. Jane Harper Sinclair had become one of the most successful pastry chefs in the world. But tonight wasn't about business success. Tonight was about family. Emma, now 15, stood near the dessert display, explaining the intricacies of French macarons to a food blogger with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in kitchens watching her mother work. She'd inherited Jane's love of baking and Liam's head for business. She talked about culinary school the way other teenagers talked about college. Owen, 12 years old and already tall enough to look Jane in the eye, helped serve champagne to guests with the charm and ease of his father. He'd decided he wanted to be an architect. He spent hours sketching buildings, designing spaces where people could feel safe and happy. And Alice, 5 years old with dark curls and green eyes, raced between the tables in her princess dress, stealing macarons when she thought no one was watching. Liam found Jane standing by the windows, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the river. "Thinking about something?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Just remembering," Jane said. "Where we started, where we are now." Liam kissed her temple. "We've come a long way from that penthouse. They'd sold the Fifth Avenue penthouse 2 years ago. Too many ghosts, too many memories of Hazel's cruelty and Mildred's judgment. They'd bought a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights instead, close to Jane's mother, Carmen, who now lived comfortably in a small house Jane had purchased for her 3 blocks away. Carmen came to every family dinner, spoiling her grandchildren and telling stories about Jane's childhood that made the kids laugh and Jane groan with embarrassment. "Do you ever think about her?" Liam asked quietly. "About Hazel?" "Sometimes," Jane admitted. "I think about how sad her life was. How she had everything and threw it away because she couldn't let go of anger. She made her choices. I know, but I also know I could have become like her. Bitter, cruel, consumed by the need for revenge. She taught me what not to be." Across the room, Emma called out, "Mom! Dad! Come take a picture with us." The family gathered together. Emma and Owen flanked their parents. Alice stood in front, holding Jane's hand. A photographer from Food and Wine captured the moment. "One more," the photographer called, this time with Grandma Carmen. Carmen joined them, beaming, her weathered hands on Owen's shoulders. She'd worked her whole life as a seamstress, sacrificed everything to raise Jane alone after her husband died. Now she got to watch her daughter thrive. The camera flashed. Later, after the guests had left and the staff was cleaning up, Jane found herself alone in the kitchen. She ran her hand along the marble counter, remembering the tiny Brooklyn apartment where she'd baked her first batch of macarons on a scratched electric stove, remembering the champagne-soaked humiliation at the plaza, remembering the years of being invisible. She'd come so far, not just in business success or social status, but in understanding who she was. She wasn't the daughter of a convicted criminal, forever marked by shame. She wasn't just the nanny who got lucky. She wasn't defined by Hazel's cruelty or Mildred's judgment or society's expectations. She was Jane Harper Sinclair, mother, wife, entrepreneur, survivor, fighter, and she'd earned every single piece of the life she'd built. Ready to go home? Liam appeared in the doorway, Alice asleep on his shoulder. "Ready," Jane said. They walked out into the November night, Emma and Owen ahead of them arguing about which subway line was faster. Carmen beside them talking about tomorrow's dinner plans, Alice dreaming against her father's chest. Jane thought about the question from the prologue, the one that had started this whole story. What's worse than having champagne thrown in your face in front of 300 people? She knew the answer now. Nothing was worse. Because that moment, as terrible as it had been, had set everything else in motion. It had shown her she was stronger than shame, stronger than cruelty, stronger than people who tried to make her feel small. That champagne-soaked night hadn't broken her. It had forged her. And in the end, the woman who'd thrown that champagne had died alone in a prison cell, while Jane had built a family, a business, and a life filled with love. That wasn't revenge. That was just the natural consequence of choosing love over hate, courage over fear, growth over bitterness. Jane had won, not because she'd destroyed her enemy, but because she'd refused to let her enemy destroy her. As they descended into the subway station, Alice stirred awake. "Mama," the little girl murmured sleepily. "Yes, baby? Are we going home?" Jane smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home." And home wasn't a penthouse on Fifth Avenue, or a beach house in the Hamptons, or any of the places that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. Home was wherever her family was. The family she'd fought for, the family she'd earned, the family that had chosen her just as surely as she'd chosen them. That was the real fairy tale, not a nanny becoming a princess, but a woman becoming herself and living happily ever after anyway. Jane's story is over, but yours continues. If you've ever felt invisible or fought to build something from nothing, you're not alone. What would you have done in Jane's position? Would you have forgiven Mildred? Could you have faced Hazel in prison? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of resilience and second chances, like If You Believe Kindness Wins. and share this with someone who needs to remember that invisible people can become unstoppable.